Joining us next is Congresswoman Suzan DelBene of Washington State. She's the co-chair of the Women's High-Tech Caucus in Congress and has more than 2 decades of experience as a successful technology entrepreneur and business leader. Suzan, it's great to be with you today, and I was joking. I actually misnamed your dog. I think it's Rayleigh or Riley, and I was hoping we could bring your dog on as well, because I know you've been doing some fun things on dogs, but we've got some serious stuff here to talk about too. But if your dog comes by, that's fine. I wanted to ask you on this broad question of connectivity, and again, I think it's an interesting time because I see people struggling out there in ways I'm not used to in the digital environment. Some think it's a fun surf. It's like catching a surf in a wave. Others are really struggling. You were at Microsoft. You are the most digitally literate person in the U.S. Congress. How do you help smooth out the edges of the problem of this challenge we're in now?
Well, I think we have to realize that there's a technology problem, but there's also a just disparity in terms of the type of work that different people do. The technology problem would be that we don't have equal access. I represent a region that's one of the biggest tech hubs in the globe, and yet you can drive an hour and a half away from where I am right now and be in a place where there's no cell service or broadband. And so when we talk about kids having access, when we talk about being able to telework at all, those opportunities aren't available for folks there. But even in an area where we have a lot of technology availability and capacity, there just are a lot of jobs that telework doesn't help with. If you're working at the grocery store, if you are a construction worker, there's so many different scenarios. And I think what this pandemic has done is really highlighted those disparities even more. So technology can help. There's some folks, my son's a software developer. He's able to really do his job almost exactly as he was before from home. But for so many people, those opportunities aren't available. So disparity in terms of the foundational technology that's available, things like broadband, and then disparities in the types of jobs. And it's really been highlighted here. And I think we have to understand the impacts from both of those directions.
I was trying to think this morning, the number of times you and I have had this conversation over the years, and it's quite a number. Do you think this pandemic is finally the issue that will force this problem of connectivity and connecting people who are not, and move it forward in a more substantial way than it has before? Because this is not a new problem. This is an aggravated problem. And I'm just wondering whether you have confidence that the pandemic changes the political calculus for some of your colleagues.
Well, it certainly should. I have been very frustrated because things have been so slow. But I think if anyone wondered whether this was a priority or not, I would think that the situation we're in across the country has really highlighted how critical it is that we provide technology access, and in particular broadband. I mean, just look at, you talked about schools earlier, talking about schools, the disparity between a child in my district who has parents who work in technology and has the ability to get online pretty easily. And then you can just be, not even that far away in a place where that same opportunity isn't available, that same educational experience isn't available. So we have to, this was not an anticipated scenario that we're in now, but I think that it's really highlighted how quickly some folks were able to adapt, and also how the challenges that many folks in our community still face. And so we tried to address these in legislation, these issues from an emergency response standpoint in legislation we passed in Congress. But these are long-term issues we've got to continually address, and it has to be a priority of Congress. And I've tried to fight for that, and we're going to have to keep fighting for that because we have to make a difference.
You and I both know Larry Irving, who's been a real crusader on the digital divide issue for a long time. And it just occurs to me that the 5G world that I was discussing with Commissioner O'Reilly has the potential to cost more, it can be great, but it may not have a place for lots of people, particularly those who are in the lower socioeconomic level, and who are discriminated communities that have had systemic racism kind of piled up against them. And so we may actually see a big jump even to a worse situation. Do you have any thoughts on what we can actually tangibly do to prevent that more dystopian future from taking hold?
Well, I think there are definitely, there's the physical infrastructure that has to be put in place. That's got to be a priority, but also making sure we have programs. We do things to make sure that people have access to energy, for example, for housing. And I think we have to look at how we make sure we have access to technology available to folks so that we have equal opportunities, for example, for education, for economic development in our smaller towns that have been hit hard. So those are things where I think we have an opportunity to address in policy and really make a difference and help make sure that people really do have the tools that they need to be able to be successful.
I want to get someone on in a second to ask a question, but I want to ask you, we're in the political season right now, and got a big race. Somehow it's going to take place amidst all of this with social distancing, maybe electronically. I don't know if we're going to have, true conventions or not. And, I know that you, as a former Microsoft person in Congress, I'm just sort of interested in how you think it's, tell us how you think it's going to look. How is it going to feel in this new world to politically campaign? You have to run a campaign in all this.
Yeah, it's a very different environment, and I think everyone's trying to figure it out in their own way. In some places, it provides an opportunity for folks to come together closely. We've had a lot of virtual discussions, video conferences, and it's really brought a lot of folks together who might not normally be able to physically be in a room together, and I think that's been an opportunity. Clearly, folks spend a lot of time in a campaign knocking on a door, and so those things have to change. And the disparities we talk about are also crucial issues, because it's one thing to be able to connect with folks who do have the ability to connect, but we have to think about how we're going to connect with the folks who don't have the technology access. And in a district like mine, where there's a lot of rural area, a lot of folks who live in our mountains or in our rural, in our agricultural communities, how we connect. And in some ways, folks might go back to traditional ways that existed in terms of sending people information, the telephone. And so everyone's trying to figure that out on their own right now.
Actually, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to sleep in one last little question, because I have a cynical question. After 9/11 took place, what happened in Washington is everything that got funded rebranded itself as being related to terrorism or 9/11. I'm just wondering, is there not an opportunity in the era of the coronavirus to talk about connecting the public in ways, to look at these multi-trillion-dollar aid packages that are coming out of Congress and make a bigger share of that, finally fixing this problem of connectivity to all communities?
Well, in the legislation that we most recently passed in the House, the HEROES Act, we really spent and focused energy and resources on things like making sure there were hotspots available, just a quick response, making sure that folks' connectivity is not cut off during this emergency. We talk about criticality, not just for communications, but things like telemedicine, which have been critical to providing healthcare access for folks who are concerned about going or are unable to go physically see their doctor. These are really important resources. And so we address that in legislation right now, but as we look going forward, and especially we talk about infrastructure, we have to talk about technology infrastructure and make sure that it's not just programs with some incentives, but really we talk about basic things like mapping and being able to know what type of access is available across the country, making sure that's accurate and showing demonstrably that we are making progress to get to every community. We know we can do this. It has to be a priority, and we have to track it and have oversight to make sure it gets done.
Great, thank you. We have a quick question for you. Go ahead.
Are you setting in place a review process so that these technologies can be really well vetted? Because recently, I think everyone is aware that we've had a number of technologies rolled out promising to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, and unfortunately, virtually all of them have in the end turned out to have clay feet in one place or another.
So it's a great point. We absolutely need to be able to make sure technologies are validated in terms of how they work, to make sure they actually meet the goals of what they're expecting the individual technology to do, but also to make sure that they are upholding their promise to consumers. And one area I think is critically important is consumer data privacy, something I've been fighting for because we don't have a federal policy there. We've been pushing, and a group of us have introduced legislation to address data privacy during the pandemic to make sure as we work on our public health response, we remember that we can use technology for our public health response and protect consumer data privacy. But we need to look at that going forward. So we need to vet technologies, as you say, but we also need to make sure that they are living up to their responsibilities in terms of protecting people's very personal information.
Representative Suzan DelBene, thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to continuing this discussion, but thanks for moving the needle on these issues. Good to see you.
Thank
Stay
you,
safe.
and sorry my dog didn't come by to say hi today.
Yeah, next time we got to build that in. So thank you.
Okay.